Richard Hawley, CEO of Hawley Corporation, the wealthiest man in the elite circles, was drugged and ended up in bed with his own assistant Dot in Manhattan's glittering world of the elite. Richard had always been the untouchable one. His face on the cover of Forbes, a sharp suit tailored in Milan hugging his tall frame, and a gaze as cold as steel had made him the embodiment of control and success. Richard Hall did not make mistakes. He calculated, strategized, conquered. That was the image he had so carefully built and protected Dot until that night. The Hawley Corporation's 30th anniversary gala was everything it was supposed to be, a display of power, wealth, and influence. The Plaza Hotel's chandeliers sparkled. The golden light reflected against champagne flutes, and the sound of jazz floated over conversations about mergers, acquisitions, and politics. The city's power brokers gathered their bank CEOs, real estate moguls, even a senator or two. Richard was the man of the evening, walking up the grand staircase with his usual self-assurance, raising a glass to toast 30 years of dominance. But later that night, when the applause faded and the last of the guests were gone, Richard felt something wrong. A single glass of wine, one that tasted no different from the others, had left his head swimming, his body heavy, his control slipping. He prided himself on never drinking beyond his limit. Tonight, his limit had betrayed him, or perhaps someone had pushed it. Through the haze, he remembered the soft click of heels on marble. Sabrina Moore, his personal assistant, appeared at his side. Sabrina always polished, always watching. Her emerald green eyes carried a glint of ambition he had noticed before, but never dwelled on. She leaned close, her perfume heady, her voice a whisper silkier than the music still playing faintly in the ballroom. "Mr. Hawley," she murmured, "let me take care of you." The rest blurred into fragments. Dot when he opened his eyes. Morning light cut through the hotel suite's curtains. The sheets smelled of her perfume. Sabrina lay beside him, bare shoulders peeking above the white duvet, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. Richard's stomach clenched. Evelyn's face, his wife's face, flashed in his mind. Her soft brown eyes, the way she always looked at him as though she still believed in the man beneath the empire. He had broken something sacred. Richard swung his legs off the bed, pulling on his shirt with trembling hands. He couldn't look at her, couldn't even form words. But Sabrina filled the silence with ease, her voice almost tender. "Last night, it was fate, Richard." He froze at that word. Fate. Richard Hawley had never believed in fate. He believed in contracts, in leverage, in controlling every outcome. Yet here was a mistake, a vulnerability that threatened to unravel him. Weeks passed. He buried himself in work, convinced he could seal this memory away, lock it where no one could touch it. But Sabrina did not let him forget. She came to his office one morning, her complexion pale, her hand trembling as she held out a sonogram photo. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Richard's world stilled. The news spread like wildfire through Hawley Corporation's inner circle and then to the family estate. To his parents and the board members tied by blood, this was not scandal, it was salvation. An heir, no, heirs twins. Evelyn, his wife of 3 years, had not yet given him a child. And now Sabrina, the eager, ambitious assistant, had provided what Evelyn had not. That night, dinner at the Hall mansion turned into a celebration. His mother raised her glass, diamonds glittering on her fingers. "Richard, at last you've secured the family's future." At the long dining table, Evelyn sat in silence. The clink of silverware against porcelain rang hollow. Sabrina, her hand placed protectively over her stomach, played the role of the fragile, expectant mother, garnering sympathetic glances from every side. Richard kept his eyes on his plate, unable to look at Evelyn. He knew what he would see there: betrayal, sorrow, disbelief. She said nothing. Not one word, but her silence cut deeper than any accusation could. Later that night, when the house fell quiet, Richard stood in his study, staring out at the city lights. The skyline stretched before him, a monument to everything he had built, but for the first time, he felt it all slipping. Evelyn's absence from his side, even in her quiet presence, was a void he couldn't ignore. Sabrina had secured her place. The family had welcomed her, but in Richard's chest, there was a weight he could not shake, the knowledge that Evelyn was slipping further away, and that it was his fault, and this was only the beginning. Evelyn Carter hadn't grown up with chandeliers or limousines. Her childhood home on the outskirts of Boston was modest, filled with the warmth of her parents' laughter and the scent of her mother's cooking. She had inherited her father's meticulous eye for design and her mother's resilience. By 25, she was already making a name for herself in interior design, her portfolio brimming with projects that blended elegance with practicality. She was the kind of woman who carried herself with effortless grace, her hazel eyes bright with ambition, her smile lighting up every room she entered. When she first met Richard Hawley, it was at a charity auction in Manhattan. Evelyn had been hired to redesign the event stage, and Richard was there as the keynote sponsor. He was magnetic in a way that caught her off guard, tall, commanding, his words crisp and deliberate. She remembered the way his gaze swept the room as though he owned not just the gala, but the entire city skyline outside those windows. And then, inexplicably, his eyes had lingered on her. "You designed this?" he asked when they met beside the silent auction tables. Evelyn flushed, a little embarrassed. "Just the stage and the backdrop. Nothing compared to what you do." He steadied her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile rare and devastating. "I disagree. You make people look. You hold their attention. That's power." That night, Richard bid on a painting not because he wanted it, but because Evelyn had admired it earlier. It was the beginning of a whirlwind. Within months, dinners in hidden corners of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants turned into weekend getaways to the Hamptons, and eventually into a diamond ring that glittered like a promise under the lights of Central Park. For Evelyn, it felt like stepping into a fairy tale. She had fallen for Richard's intensity, his certainty, the way he seemed to carry the world on his shoulders without ever bending. She believed she had found love and security in one breathtaking package. Her friends envied her, her parents worried she was moving too fast. But Evelyn only saw the man who looked at her as though she was the only thing in a world full of deals and dollars. The first year of their marriage was a blur of galas, fundraisers, and magazine spreads. Evelyn became the perfect society wife, praised in glossy columns as Richard Hale's stunning partner. Photographers adored her poise, her ability to make every gown look effortless, and the way she smiled at Richard as if no one else existed. But behind the glittering facade, Evelyn had quietly given up her design practice. Richard had insisted it was unnecessary. "You don't need to work anymore," he told her one evening as they dressed for a gala at the Met. "You'll be far more valuable at my side." Representing the family, Evelyn hesitated. "But I love what I do, Richard. It's not just about money." He adjusted his cufflinks, his tone even. "It's not about money. It's about priorities. My world requires focus. Distractions, any distractions, will only weaken us. Don't you want to build something stronger together?" Evelyn had swallowed her protest, convincing herself that this was compromise, that marriage demanded sacrifice. She told herself that someday, when the timing was right, she could return to her work. For now, she would support him. Yet, as months turned into years, cracks began to show. Richard's commanding presence, once intoxicating, began to feel suffocating. His schedule left little time for intimacy, his conversations increasingly dominated by numbers and strategies. When Evelyn suggested they spend a weekend away, he dismissed it as frivolous. When she voiced loneliness, he responded with irritation. "I provide everything for you," he said once, his voice sharp. "You live in a mansion, you wear couture, you're respected everywhere you go. Isn't that enough?" Evelyn stared at him, her chest tight. "I didn't marry you for mansions or gowns, Richard. I married you because I loved you." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something softer, almost vulnerable, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He kissed her forehead absently, as though she were a child seeking comfort, and returned to his laptop. That night, lying awake beside him, Evelyn realized she was lonelier than she had ever been in her small Boston apartment. The wealth, the prestige, the glittering events, it was all meaningless if she had to face it alone. Still, she clung to the hope that things would change. Richard was under pressure, she told herself. He needed her patience, her steadiness. She believed their love, the love that had once made her feel like the luckiest woman, alive would be enough, but she didn't know then how fragile that love really was, or how quickly it could shatter under the weight of betrayal. The cracks in their marriage deepened long before Evelyn realized how wide they had grown. Richard came home later and later, his phone glued to his ear even at the dinner table. When Evelyn reached for conversation, she often received nothing more than a distracted nod. Their bed, once a sanctuary, grew cold with untouched pillows and silence stretching between them. She told herself it was business. Richard bore the weight of Holly Corporation. She should be proud of his dedication. But loneliness crept in like a draft through a broken window, constant and chilling. Evelyn tried to ignore it, but each time she looked at him across the dinner table, she felt the gulf widening. And then came the night of the gala. Evelyn remembered the shimmer of the chandeliers, the sea of gowns and tuxedos, the way Richard commanded attention as if the entire ballroom bent around his orbit. She had smiled, as always, playing the part of the perfect wife. But when Richard disappeared for the night, leaving her to smile and make excuses to curious onlookers, something inside her shifted. She didn't know then what had happened in that hotel suite. She only knew that when Richard returned home, there was a heaviness in his step, a distance in his eyes. He didn't touch her that night. He didn't explain. Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, sensing the shadow of something she couldn't name pressing down on them. Weeks later, the truth arrived at the Hall mansion in the form of Sabrina Moore. The assistant walked into the marble-floored dining room, her frame delicate in a pale dress, her hands trembling as she held out a manila envelope. She looked every bit the frightened ingenue, but when she lifted her chin and her emerald eyes met Evelyn's, there was a flicker of something sharp, something victorious. I didn't know how else to say this," Sabrina whispered, placing the sonogram on the table. "I'm pregnant. Richard's children." The room froze. Evelyn felt her breath catch, her heart slam against her ribs. She stared at the black and white image, the small forms on the screen that symbolized betrayal made flesh. Richard's mother was the first to speak, her voice trembling with glee. "Twins, Richard, do you realize what this means?" Heirs to the Hawley name. Glasses lifted, smiles bloomed. Around the table, Evelyn's world-shattered dot, she sat motionless, the clinking of silverware suddenly deafening. Sabrina pressed a hand against her flat stomach, feigning fragility. Richard remained silent, his jaw set, eyes fixed on the table as if the polished wood might swallow him whole. He didn't look at Evelyn, not once. It was Evelyn's father-in-law who delivered the cruelest blow, his voice booming with pride. "At last, the family's future is secure. Richard, you've done well." Evelyn's throat burned. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask Richard how he could sit there in silence while his family celebrated another woman carrying his children. but her voice betrayed her. She stayed silent, her dignity the only armor left. Later, alone in their bedroom, Evelyn confronted him. "Tell me it isn't true," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Tell me she's lying." Richard stood by the window, his back to her, hands shoved into his pockets. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice came low and flat. "It happened. I'll take responsibility." Evelyn's knees weakened. "Take responsibility? What about me? What about our marriage?" "You're still my wife," Richard said, finally turning to face her. His eyes were hard, unreadable. "That hasn't changed. But Sabrina is carrying my children. I can't abandon them. I won't." Her chest constricted, the words like shards of glass cutting her from the inside. She stared at the man she had once believed was her destiny, the man she had given up her dreams to stand beside. Now he looked at her as though she were nothing more than a formality, a title to be maintained. Evelyn turned away, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She pressed a hand against her stomach, empty and hollow. While another woman's pregnancy was hailed as the triumph of the Hallway family, from that night forward, Evelyn understood she was alone in this marriage. The mansion's glittering chandeliers no longer dazzled. They mocked her. The gowns in her closet felt like costumes for a role she no longer believed in. Each day she walked through the grand halls. She was reminded that she was the wife in name only tolerated, but no longer cherished. And beneath her silence, a seed of despair began to grow, threatening to consume everything she had once believed about love, loyalty, and the man she thought she had married. The weeks that followed Sabrina's announcement were a cruel theater Evelyn could not escape. The Hallway mansion, once her home, became a stage where every glance, every word, seemed scripted to remind her of her diminishing place. Sabrina played her part with flawless precision. She floated through the grand halls in flowing dresses, her hands often resting on her still flat belly as though protecting the future inside her. She spoke softly, with a sweetness that cloaked the ambition gleaming in her eyes. Around the family, she was humility and fragility embodied. One evening, Evelyn walked into the drawing room to find Sabrina seated beside Richard's mother on the velvet sofa. The older woman clasped Sabrina's hands with affection. "You must be careful, dear. No stress, no strain. The babies are precious," she cooed. Sabrina lowered her lashes. "I know, Mrs. Hawley. Evelyn has been very kind. She even offered me tea this morning." Her voice trembled as though such a simple gesture was an act of sainthood. Richard entered then, his gaze immediately seeking Sabrina. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture Evelyn hadn't felt in months. "Are you comfortable? Do you need anything?" Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway, invisible in her own house. Her heart pounded, her chest tightening as Richard bent to listen to Sabrina's reply. She turned away, leaving before anyone noticed her standing there like an intruder. The whispers began not long after. Anonymous text messages appeared on Sabrina's phone, threats, curses, promises of misfortune for her unborn children. She presented them to Richard with trembling hands, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I don't want to cause trouble," she whispered, "but I think Evelyn doesn't want these babies to be born." Richard's jaw clenched as he read the messages. That evening, he confronted Evelyn in the library, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. "Did you send these?" he demanded, thrusting the phone toward her. Evelyn recoiled. "Of course not." "Richard, you know me, do I?" His eyes bored into hers, icy and distant. "She's carrying my children. If you're trying to sabotage that," her voice broke, "I would never hurt an innocent child. Do you truly think I'm capable of that?" Richard didn't answer. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his silence more condemning than words. He left her there, standing among the rows of books, the air thick with betrayal. From then on, every misstep became ammunition. When Sabrina stumbled on the marble staircase one afternoon, clutching the railing with a gasp, the household rushed to her aid. Evelyn, who had been at the top of the stairs, was accused of carelessness. "You should be more mindful," Richard's mother scolded. "She could have lost the babies." Evelyn's protest died in her throat. She knew the truth, that Sabrina's stumble had been nothing more than an act, but the eyes around her saw only guilt. Nights became unbearable. Richard's side of the bed grew emptier as he spent hours in Sabrina's wing of the mansion, ensuring her comfort. Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the echo of her own heartbeat. The silence pressed against her, suffocating. She tried to speak to him once, late at night when he finally came to their room. "Richard, please," she whispered. "Talk to me. Don't shut me out." He loosened his tie, his expression impassive. "I have responsibilities now. You don't understand what's at stake." "I'm your wife," Evelyn pleaded, tears brimming. "I should be the one you lean on." He glanced at her briefly, then away. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The words cut deeper than any insult. Harder than it needs to be, as though her pain was an inconvenience. Her existence a complication in his newfound devotion to Sabrina and the children she carried. Evelyn began to fade into the background of her own life. Meals were eaten in silence, her seat at the table little more than a formality. Conversations swirled around her, centering on prenatal care, nursery plans, and future heirs. No one asked for her thoughts. No one sought her presence. In the solitude of her room, Evelyn clutched her journal, scribbling words she couldn't say aloud. "I am a ghost in my own home, invisible, disposable, forgotten. And though she kept her composure before others, inside she was unraveling. The woman who had once been vibrant, ambitious, full of dreams, now stood on the edge of despair. It didn't take long for the next accusation to come. One morning, the household awoke to find Sabrina weeping in her suite, clutching a broken porcelain vase. Shards glittered on the carpet like tiny daggers. She left the window open. Sabrina sobbed to Richard, her voice hoarse with distress. The cold draft knocked it over. What if it had hit me? Evelyn stood in the doorway, bewildered. "I wasn't even here," she said quietly, her eyes darting from Sabrina's theatrics to Richard's rigid stance. Sabrina's gaze flicked toward her, brimming with faux innocence. "I don't mean to blame Evelyn, but you were the last one in this room yesterday. Maybe it was just carelessness." Richard's mother wasted no time. "Evelyn, how could you be so negligent? Sabrina is carrying the family's legacy. You must think before you act." Richard's silence was worse than anger. He simply placed a hand on Sabrina's shoulder, his expression unreadable. The gesture, small as it was, screamed louder than words. He believed her. Evelyn retreated before anyone saw the tears in her eyes. In her room, she pressed her palms against her temples, struggling to quiet the storm in her head. How did my life come to this? The mansion, with its gleaming marble and ornate chandeliers, now felt like a prison. Every corner echoed with whispers, every glance weighed heavy with suspicion. Servants who once smiled at her now averted their eyes, their loyalties shifting to the woman who carried the future heirs. Evelyn no longer felt like the mistress of the house, but a guest overstaying her welcome at night. The tension boiled over. One evening, Richard returned late. Evelyn waited in the bedroom, determination tightening her chest. She couldn't stay silent any longer. "Richard," she began, her voice trembling but firm, "do you even hear yourself anymore? Do you realize what's happening to me in this house?" He loosened his tie, his expression already weary. "Not tonight, Evelyn." "No, you will listen tonight." The words burst out before she could stop them. "I am being treated like a criminal under this roof, accused of things I didn't do, shamed by your family, and you stand there silent. Or worse, you stand by her. His eyes darkened. She's carrying my children. What do you expect me to do? Ignore her? I expect you to remember I am your wife? Evelyn's voice cracked, her hands shaking. Do vows mean nothing to you? Does love mean nothing? For the first time, Richard's composure slipped, his jaw tightening. Love doesn't feed heirs. Love doesn't secure a family's legacy. I am doing what I must. Her breath caught. So I am nothing more than a placeholder to you. A name. A title. He looked at her for a long moment, something like regret flickering in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He turned away. You're making this harder than it needs to be. The finality in his tone hollowed her out. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed long after he left the room, staring at the diamond ring glinting on her finger. Once a promise, now a shackled dot in the days that followed, Evelyn moved like a shadow. The laughter of Richard's family at breakfast grated against her ears. The sight of Sabrina resting on chaise lounges, basking in attention, twisted her stomach. The mansion felt colder, lonelier, though it was more crowded than ever. Late at night, Evelyn found herself in the study, flipping through old photographs. Pictures of her and Richard in the early days Central Park picnics. Hampton's weekends, stolen kisses on balconies overlooking the city. The man who had once made her feel seen and cherished seemed like a stranger now. She traced her finger over his smile in the photo, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She closed the album with trembling hands. The decision began to form, fragile but inevitable. She could not live like this. She could not stay in a marriage where her worth was measured only by her ability or inability to produce heirs. One evening, she slipped into her room early, locking the door, and pulled out a notepad. With shaking hands, she began to write the first draft of a separation agreement. She didn't know if she would have the courage to hand it to him, but the act of putting pen to paper was a lifeline, a whisper of freedom she had long forgotten. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine life beyond these walls. A small apartment, her own work, her own choices. A life not defined by the Holly name or Richard's shadow. The thought terrified her, but it also gave her hope. It was raining the night Evelyn realized she had been abandoned completely. She had stayed late at an art gallery opening, desperate for some sliver of distraction from the suffocating air of the Holly mansion. Her umbrella had broken in the wind, leaving her to walk the slick streets of Manhattan with only her coat pulled tight. The city, usually alive with dazzling lights and motion, felt hostile. That evening shadows lengthened, footsteps echoed behind her, and an unease curled in her stomach. She quickened her pace, clutching her purse, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. That was when 3 figures emerged from an alley, blocking her path. Men with hoods pulled low and eyes sharp with hunger. One of them stepped forward, his voice slurred with menace. Pretty lady like you shouldn't be out here alone. Hand over the bag. Evelyn froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The street was deserted. The rain masked any chance of her cries carrying. Panic clawed at her throat. Her first instinct was to reach for her phone. With trembling fingers, she dialed Richard. He answered on the second ring, his voice clipped. Evelyn, it's late. What is it? Her breath came in ragged gasps. Richard, please, you have to help me. I'm on Madison, near 47th. Men, they're following me. They won't let me pass, please. I'm scared. There was a pause. The sound of voices in the background, clinking glasses, the hum of a party. Then Richard's tone, cool and dismissive. Call the police. I'm in the middle of something important. Richard, the line went dead. For a moment, Evelyn stood there, phone pressed against her ear, rain soaking her hair and mascara streaking down her cheeks. The men advanced, and she felt the bottom drop out of her world. Her husband, the man she had once trusted above all else, had left her to face this alone. That now. One of them lunged, grabbing her arm. She screamed, stumbling back, pain shooting through her wrist, and then another voice, sharp as steel. Let her go. From the darkness, a tall man stepped into the glow of a street lamp. His presence was electric, his shoulders broad beneath a drenched navy coat, his jaw set with authority. The men hesitated, muttering curses, but something in his stance, confident, unyielding, made them falter. Find someone else to harass, he warned, his voice low, dangerous. Because if you touch her again, you won't walk away. The tension stretched, the rain pounding like war drums. Then, with a final shove, the men scattered into the night. Evelyn's knees gave way. The stranger caught her before she hit the ground. Easy, he murmured, steadying her. You're safe now. She blinked up at him, her vision blurred by tears and rain. His face was striking dark hair plastered to his forehead. Piercing gray eyes filled not with pity, but with steady concern. I thank you, she stammered, her voice shaking. I didn't know what to do. My husband, her throat closed around the word, shame flooding her. He glanced at the phone still clutched in her hand, the unanswered lifeline. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, maybe even disappointment on her behalf, but he said nothing. Instead, he shrugged off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. Let's get you somewhere safe, he said. Do you live nearby? Evelyn nodded faintly, allowing him to guide her to the curb. He hailed a cab with a whistle, holding the door as she slid inside. She caught sight of her reflection in the window, soaked, makeup smeared, a picture of despair. She looked nothing like the flawless society wife the tabloids adored. As the cab pulled away, silence settled between them. She tried to steady her breathing, but her chest ached. A sharp, twisting pain stabbed beneath her ribs, one she had ignored for weeks, thinking it was stress or skipped meals. But now, in the aftermath of fear, it burned hotter, leaving her clutching her stomach. Are you hurt? The man asked quickly, his gaze sharp. Evelyn shook her head weakly. No, just tired. It's nothing. But his eyes narrowed with quiet skepticism. When they reached her building, he paid the driver before she could protest. She turned to him, still trembling. You didn't have to. I did, he interrupted gently. And I'm not leaving you at the door like this. Someone should be here for you. There was a steadiness in his tone she hadn't heard in so long. It disarmed her, left her with no strength to argue. She led him upstairs, fumbling with her keys. Inside, the apartment was dark and silent, its emptiness magnified by her humiliation. He set his coat on the chair, studying her quietly. You should see a doctor, he said finally. That pain you tried to hide, it's not nothing. Trust me. Evelyn sank onto the sofa, exhaustion pressing down. For the first time in years, she let herself be seen drenched, vulnerable, broken. The stranger stood a few feet away, patient, not prying. Thank you, she whispered again. He offered a faint smile, one that carried more warmth than she had felt in months. My name is Nathaniel Cross, and you don't need to thank me. For Evelyn, it was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name, a flicker of safety, of hope, in the ruins of betrayal. The following morning, Evelyn woke to a heaviness she could not shake. Her body felt drained, her stomach knotted in pain, so sharp it forced her upright in bed. The memories of the previous night rushed back Richard's cold dismissal, the alleyway, the strangers, and then Nathaniel's steady hands pulling her back from terror. She pressed her palms to her face, tears stinging her eyes. It wasn't just fear. It was the raw humiliation of realizing her husband had chosen not to save her. That truth gnawed at her more than the ache in her stomach. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a foolish moment, she hoped it was Richard checking in. Instead, the screen showed a curt text, "Board meeting at noon." "Don't embarrass me." Her fingers tightened around the device until her knuckles whitened. She didn't reply. By mid-morning, the sharp pain worsened. Evelyn tried to steady herself with tea, but the nausea was overwhelming. She barely made it to the kitchen before collapsing against the counter. That was when her intercom buzzed. She dragged herself to the door, opening it to find Nathaniel standing there, holding a small bag of groceries. His eyes widened as he took in her pale face. "You don't look well," he said simply. "I'm fine," she lied. Swaying slightly, Nathaniel stepped forward, catching her before she stumbled. "You're not fine. You need a doctor." "I can't, Richard." She started, but the words felt pathetic even as they left her mouth. Why was she defending him? Why was she still hiding behind his name? Nathaniel's voice softened, but there was no mistaking the firmness beneath. "This isn't about him. This is about you." For a long moment, she resisted, pride and shame tangling in her chest. But the pain made the choice for her. She nodded faintly. Within the hour, Nathaniel was driving her to Mount Sinai Hospital. He didn't ask intrusive questions, didn't fill the silence with empty platitudes. He just drove, the quiet hum of the car oddly comforting. Evelyn found herself studying his profile-strong jaw, a faint scar near his temple, eyes fixed on the road with calm determination. At the hospital, tests were run swiftly. Evelyn sat in the sterile waiting room, her hands trembling in her lap. Nathaniel remained beside her, steady as a pillar. When the doctor returned, clipboard in hand, Evelyn braced herself. The words came like a hammer: gastric cancer, early stage, but requiring immediate treatment. Her breath caught. The world blurred. Cancer. The word echoed in her skull, surreal and devastating. She thought of her empty apartment, her cold marriage, Richard's indifference. The fear of dying alone hollowed her out. Her voice cracked. "I can't do this." Nathaniel leaned forward, his tone quiet but resolute. "Yes, you can. And you won't be doing it alone." Evelyn turned toward him, tears spilling freely now. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Something flickered in his gray eyes, a shadow of his own past. "Perhaps," but he answered simply, "because someone should have helped you long ago. And because I won't stand by while you're left to fight this by yourself." The sincerity in his words pierced through the fog of despair. For the first time in months, maybe years, Evelyn felt seen not as a liability, not as a burden, but as a human being in pain who deserved care. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm of appointments, treatments, and exhaustion. Richard remained conspicuously absent, offering only excuses about business priorities. Evelyn stopped expecting him to show up. Instead, it was Nathaniel who carried her through. He arrived with warm meals when she was too nauseated to cook, drove her to and from the hospital, and sat quietly by her side when she was too weak to talk. He never asked for gratitude. He simply stayed. There were nights when Evelyn would wake from feverish dreams, the pain unbearable, only to find Nathaniel adjusting a blanket or pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. His presence was steady, grounding her through the chaos of illness. One evening, after a particularly brutal treatment session, she whispered hoarsely, "I don't know how to thank you." He met her gaze, his voice low. "You don't owe me thanks, just don't give up." Evelyn's heart tightened. No one had said that to her in so long, not Richard, not her in-laws, not anyone in the suffocating circle of wealth and appearances she had been trapped in. The vulnerability terrified her, but it also soothed her. Slowly, she began to let down the walls she had built around herself. In Nathaniel's presence, she didn't need to pretend. She didn't need to be flawless. She could be tired, sick, afraid, and still worthy of compassion. Late one night, she caught her reflection in the mirror, Pale skin, hollow cheeks, eyes dulled by fatigue. And yet, for the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. Someone saw her. Someone cared whether she woke up the next day. Evelyn touched the mirror softly, whispering to her reflection, "You're not alone anymore." Behind her, Nathaniel's voice carried from the living room, calm and reassuring as ever. "Come sit. I made tea." She smiled faintly through her tears, following the sound. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something just as vital: hope. And for Evelyn, that was the beginning of a new strength, a reason to fight. The courtroom was hushed. Every sound amplified the shuffle of papers, the ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the air conditioning. Evelyn sat across the aisle from Richard, her posture straight, her expression calm, though her fingers clenched tightly around the pen in her hand. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, but now that it had arrived, her chest ached with a mixture of fear and finality. Richard Holloway looked as immovable as ever, his designer suit flawless, his jaw set in stone. To the untrained eye, he was the picture of control. But Evelyn saw the flicker of something else: resentment, perhaps even disbelief, that she had dared to stand here and end what he thought he controlled. The judge's voice rang out. "Mrs. Holloway, are you certain you wish to proceed with this divorce?" Evelyn lifted her chin. "Yes, Your Honor, absolutely." Her voice didn't tremble. For once, it carried the weight of conviction rather than apology. Richard's lawyer rose, presenting arguments about assets, reputation, the Holloway name. Evelyn's lawyer countered, her arguments sharp and precise. Evelyn barely heard them. All she could focus on was the symbolic severing of a bond that had long since rotted. When the judge finalized the divorce decree, the gavel striking wood sounded like the closing of a coffin. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her hands trembling beneath the desk. It was over. Richard didn't move immediately. He sat rigid, eyes fixed on her as though willing her to look back. But Evelyn refused. She gathered her papers, rose gracefully, and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. Outside, the cold air hit her like a cleansing wave. Nathaniel was waiting near the steps, his tall frame leaning against a column, hands tucked in his coat pockets. His gaze softened when she approached. "It's done," she said, her voice low but steady. Nathaniel nodded. "How do you feel?" Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, searching for the right word. Free, empty, but free. He didn't try to fill the silence with false comfort. Instead, he simply stood beside her, the quiet support she had come to rely on. Days later, Evelyn returned to the house that had once been her home, only to find it transformed. Sabrina had already moved in, her designer luggage stacked in the foyer, her laughter echoing through the halls that had once carried Evelyn's so softer tones. Evelyn paused in the doorway, taking it all in. Sabrina was perched on the sofa, dressed impeccably, her hand resting proudly on her swollen belly as she chatted with Richard's mother. Evelyn's belongings had been cleared out, replaced with Sabrina's presence in every corner. Sabrina looked up, her smile sharp and triumphant. "Oh, Evelyn. Didn't expect to see you here." Evelyn didn't answer. She simply walked past, her heels clicking against the polished marble, each step echoing with the finality of goodbye. She went upstairs, collected the last of her personal items, a photograph of her late father, a silk scarf her mother had given her, and descended with quiet dignity. Richard appeared at the foot of the stairs, his expression unreadable. "You didn't need to come here," he said curtly. Evelyn met his gaze, her voice calm. "It won't happen again." And with that, she walked out, leaving behind not just the house, but the hollow shell of a marriage that had cost her nearly everything. For Richard, the days that followed were unexpectedly disquieting. At first, he told himself he had gained everything: Sabrina, the twins she carried, the approval of his family. But as the house filled with Sabrina's perfume and chatter, Richard found himself haunted by the silence Evelyn had left behind. He would sit in his office late at night, staring at the empty chair where Evelyn once curled up with a book while waiting for him to finish work. He would reach for a glass of whiskey and remember the way she used to tease him for drinking too much. The memories gnawed at him in ways he hadn't anticipated. For the first time, Richard began to sense that in choosing Sabrina's manufactured affection, he had traded away something irreplaceable, but Evelyn was no longer within reach. She was gone, and the life she had built with him had crumbled into ashes. All that remained for him was the hollow echo of what could never be restored. Nights at the Holly estate no longer carried the same rhythm. What once had been evenings of quiet routines, Evelyn reading near the fire, the faint clink of her teacup, the soft cadence of her voice when she asked about his day, had been replaced with noise. Sabrina's laughter rang sharp through the halls, mingled with the constant buzz of her phone as she shared details of her perfect life on social media. At first, Richard thought the noise would be comforting, a sign of new beginnings. Instead, it grated on him. He would retreat into his study more often, shutting the door against the chaos Sabrina brought. Yet even behind closed doors, the emptiness pressed in. The chair across from his desk sat vacant. The silence between pages of reports whispered Evelyn's absence one evening. As Sabrina arranged nursery plans with Richard's mother, he poured himself another drink and wandered into what had once been Evelyn's garden. The roses she had tended so carefully were withering untended. He crouched down, brushing a brittle petal with his fingertips, and an unexpected ache tightened his chest. Evelyn had loved those roses. She had spoken to them as if they were old friends, coaxing them to bloom even in the harsh New York winters. Sabrina appeared behind him, heels clicking on the stone path. "Why are you out here in the dark?" she asked lightly, looping her arm through his. "We should be talking about the twins' names. I like Madison and Mason." Richard nodded absently, but the words meant little. He wasn't thinking of names. He was thinking of Evelyn's quiet joy in this garden, the way she had once pressed a rose into his lapel before a board meeting, smiling at him with pride. He realized with a pang that no matter what Sabrina offered, it lacked substance. It lacked the quiet strength Evelyn carried without ever demanding recognition. Meanwhile, Evelyn's world looked very different. Her new apartment was modest compared to the Holly estate, but it was hers. No oppressive walls of judgment, no hostile stares across the dinner table. Just space that belonged to her alone. Nathaniel visited often, bringing simple comforts, fresh groceries, warm soup, flowers that brightened the small kitchen. One rainy evening, Evelyn sat curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Nathaniel placed a mug of chamomile tea in her hands. "You've been quiet today," he said gently. "I'm adjusting," she admitted. "It feels strange, not looking over my shoulder all the time. Not bracing myself for the next accusation." Nathaniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's what freedom feels like at first, unfamiliar, but you'll grow into it." Evelyn met his gaze, searching for any trace of pity, but found none. Instead, his eyes held recognition of the battles she had fought, even if she hadn't won all of them. She sipped the tea, warmth seeping into her chest. Later that night, when she couldn't sleep, she walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped by them. Instead, they shimmered like possibilities. Back at the Halley estate, Richard lay awake in the master bedroom. Sabrina slept beside him, snoring lightly, her hand draped over her swollen belly. He stared at the ceiling, the silence deafening. He thought of Evelyn again, her resilience, her quiet dignity, even when he had stripped her of everything. He rolled onto his side, opening the drawer of the nightstand. Inside, beneath cufflinks and watches, lay the letter Evelyn had left the day she moved out. Just one sentence written in her graceful hand. I hope one day you realize what you've lost. Richard closed his eyes, but the words carved deeper into his conscience than any boardroom defeat ever had. For the first time, Richard Hawa, the man who had always believed himself untouchable, felt the sting of irreversible loss, and yet, in another part of the city, Evelyn closed her eyes with a faint smile. The sound of Nathaniel tidying the kitchen in the background. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a tomorrow unshackled from pain. It wasn't love, yet not fully, but it was peace. And peace, she realized, was the soil from which love could grow. The first time Nathaniel confessed, it wasn't with grand gestures or carefully chosen words. It was quiet, almost hesitant, as if he feared breaking something fragile. They had spent the evening on Evelyn's balcony, the summer air warm and fragrant with the scent of nearby jasmine. She had been laughing at one of his stories, something about his college days, an ill-fated attempt at cooking for his roommates. The sound of her laughter was light, unburdened, and Nathaniel found himself watching her more than the city skyline. When the laughter faded, he leaned closer, his voice low. Evelyn, you deserve so much more than the life you were given. More than what he made you believe. She stiffened, caught off guard. Nathaniel, I don't want to overstep, he continued quickly. But being around you, it's not obligation. It's not pity. It's because I want to. He hesitated, searching for the right words, then finished softly, because I care about you, deeply. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of traffic below. Evelyn stared at her hands, her heart pounding. No one had spoken to her like that in years, not with sincerity, not without ulterior motives. I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been broken down, Nathaniel. I don't know if I can. He reached across, gently brushing his fingers against hers. You don't have to decide anything now. Just know I'm here. For as long as it takes. The simplicity of his words undid her. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from the unfamiliar comfort of being seen, of being valued without conditions. In the weeks that followed, small gestures deepened the bond between them. Nathaniel cooked dinner in her tiny kitchen, humming tunelessly as Evelyn leaned against the counter, watching. They took slow walks through Central Park, Evelyn's hand sometimes brushing his, neither pulling away. On the days when treatment left her weak, Nathaniel sat by her side, reading aloud from books he thought she'd enjoy, his voice a steady anchor. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Evelyn found herself confessing things she had never told anyone. He made me feel invisible, she said quietly, staring into her teacup. Like I was nothing more than a placeholder. A wife in name, but never in his heart. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. You were never invisible. Not to me. And certainly not to yourself. Don't let his blindness define you. She looked up, meeting his steady gaze, and something inside her shifted. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by Richard's shadow, but by her own choices. Meanwhile, Richard was beginning to unravel. He had tried calling Evelyn once, twice, then more often. Each attempt was met with silence. When she finally answered, her voice was cool, detached. What do you want, Richard? She asked one evening, her tone stripped of warmth. He hesitated, unaccustomed to being dismissed. I wanted to see you. To talk. There's nothing left to say, she replied, her words clipped. You made your choices. I made mine. Her detachment rattled him more than anger ever could. For years, he had grown used to her patience, her quiet forgiveness. Now, facing her indifference, He realized he no longer had any hold over her. That night, Richard sat in his study, glass of whiskey untouched, staring at the framed photographs on his desk. Evelyn's face smiled up at him from one of them, a photograph from a gala years ago, her emerald gown catching the light, her hand lightly resting on his arm. He remembered the pride in her eyes, the devotion she had given so freely, and he remembered how carelessly he had thrown it away. Sabrina noticed his distraction. "Why do you keep looking at those old pictures?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "She's gone. I'm here now." Richard didn't answer. He simply closed the drawer, hiding the photograph away, though the image lingered in his mind long after. Across town, Evelyn was learning to smile again. One evening, she and Nathaniel found themselves standing in her kitchen, flour dusting the counters from an impromptu attempt at baking. She laughed as Nathaniel clumsily wiped flour from his shirt, leaving a streak across his cheek. "Hold still," she said, reaching up to brush it away. Their eyes met, the touch lingering longer than necessary. The air between them shifted, charged with unspoken possibilities. For the first time, Evelyn didn't pull back. She let herself feel the warmth, the closeness, the quiet promise of something new. The evening had the kind of stillness that made every sound resonate. Evelyn's apartment was bathed in the warm glow of lamplight, the faint hum of the city beyond her windows, a muted backdrop. She had just set aside the dishes when Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, his expression uncharacteristically tense. "Evelyn," he began, his voice steady but low, "there's something I need to say tonight. Something I can't keep holding back." Her heart gave a nervous flutter. She set down the dish towel, hands twisting together unconsciously. "What is it?" He stepped closer, his tall frame casting a gentle shadow across the room. From his pocket, he drew a small velvet box. Evelyn froze, her breath catching in her throat as he sank to one knee. "I know what you've been through," Nathaniel said softly, eyes never leaving hers. "I know you've been hurt, betrayed, and left to believe you were unworthy of love. But I see you, Evelyn. I see your strength, your grace, your kindness, even in the face of cruelty. And his voice faltered for a second, then returned with conviction. "I love you. With everything I am. Will you marry me?" For a long, trembling moment, Evelyn couldn't speak. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. The velvet box lay open, the ring glinting in the light. But it wasn't the diamond that left her breathless. It was the raw sincerity in Nathaniel's voice, the unwavering devotion in his gaze. "Nathaniel?" Her voice broke. She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. "I don't know if I'm ready to give my heart again. I don't know if I'll ever stop being afraid." He reached for her hand, holding it firmly between his. "Then let me carry the fear with you. Let me fight for you. You don't have to be ready now. Just know that I'll be here today, tomorrow, however long it takes. You don't need to face anything alone again." The room seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn's tears turned into a quiet, trembling smile. She didn't give a definitive yes that night, but she didn't say no either. Instead, she whispered, "You're the first person who's ever made me believe I could start over." Nathaniel pressed her hand to his lips, his eyes closing briefly as if in silent promise, while Evelyn was finding hope in Nathaniel's presence. Another storm was brewing elsewhere. At the Holly estate. Whispers began to circulate. Sabrina's carefully woven image of innocence and devotion was unraveling. It started with the staff, who had noticed inconsistencies, unexplained phone calls at odd hours, visits from strangers who slipped in and out when Richard was away. Then came the financial irregularities, funds siphoned from accounts. Suspicious transfers traced back to Sabrina's personal ventures. One evening, Richard returned home early to find Sabrina in the living room, her tone sharp as she hissed into her phone. "No, you listen to me. I don't care what it takes. Those shares have to be transferred before the twins are born. I'm not going to be left with nothing after all this. The words froze him in the doorway. Sabrina turned, startled, her face draining of color. "Richard," she stammered, forcing a laugh. "It's not what you think, but the damage was done." In that moment, Richard saw through the facade he had clung to. Sabrina's tears, her manipulations, the pregnancy she wielded like a weapon, it had all been calculated. A trap laid with precision. Later that night, alone in his study, Richard poured himself a drink he couldn't finish. Evelyn's absence weighed on heavier than ever. He remembered her steady patience, the way she had stood by him even when he hadn't deserved it. And now, in the hollow silence, he realized he had traded loyalty for deceit, love for illusion. In desperation, he reached for his phone and dialed Evelyn's number. When she answered, her voice was calm, detached, yet tinged with a strength he barely recognized. "What do you want, Richard?" "I was wrong," he said quickly, the words tumbling out. "I should never have let you go. I see it now, Sabrina, everything. It's all lies. Please, Evelyn, come back. We can fix this." There was a long pause, during which Richard's heart pounded with fragile hope. Then Evelyn's voice, quiet but firm, cut through. "No, Richard. You don't get to call me now, after everything. You chose her. You left me when I needed you most. And I found someone who stayed." The line went dead, leaving Richard staring at his phone. His reflection blurred in the glass. Back in her apartment, Evelyn stood with the phone still in her hand, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Evelyn met his eyes, her own brimming with unshed tears. And for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of the past pressing her down. She felt the steady hand of the man who had carried her through her darkest hours. "Yes," she whispered, slipping her fingers into his. "For the first time in a long time, everything's going to be okay." The night of the accident was a blur of screeching tires and shattering glass. Evelyn remembered the sudden glare of headlights, the sickening jolt as her car spun across the slick asphalt, and then darkness. When she woke, it was to the antiseptic smell of a hospital room and the steady beep of a heart monitor. Her head throbbed, bandages wrapped around her temple. She tried to sit up, but a firm hand pressed gently against her shoulder. "Don't move too quickly," came a calm, familiar voice. Her eyes fluttered open, and the first face she saw was Nathaniel's. His expression was taut with worry. But the moment her gaze met his, relief softened his features. "You're awake," he breathed. As if he had been holding that hope on a thread. Evelyn blinked, disoriented. "Nathaniel?" "Yes, I'm here," he reassured her. Leaning closer, she tried to piece together the fragments in her mind, but they slipped away like sand between her fingers. What happened?" "You were in a car accident," Nathaniel explained gently. "But you're safe now. I promise." Her chest tightened, a strange panic rising. "Where's my husband?" "He should be here." Nathaniel hesitated. Before he could answer, the door burst open and Richard stormed in, his face ashen, eyes frantic. "Evelyn," he gasped, rushing to her bedside. "Thank God you're alive." Evelyn frowned, her confusion deepening. She looked at him as though he were a stranger. "Who are you?" The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He froze, his hand half extended toward her. "Evelyn." "It's me, Richard, your husband." Her brow furrowed, eyes darting toward Nathaniel. "No," she said firmly, shaking her head. "Nathaniel is my husband." Richard's heart stopped. The room seemed to tilt, the air sucked from his lungs. "What are you talking about?" "He's not, she doesn't remember," Nathaniel cut in quietly, though his own chest ached at the implication. "She's lost her memory." Right now, I'm the only one she recognizes. Richard's face crumpled with disbelief. This is insane. She's my wife. But Evelyn clung to Nathaniel's hand, her eyes pleading. Don't let him take me away, please. The desperation in her voice shattered Richard. He staggered back a step, every ounce of his pride stripped away by the cruel irony of fate. The woman he had once discarded now looked at him as nothing more than a stranger dot in the days that followed. Evelyn's condition remained fragile. Doctors explained her memory loss as temporary, the result of trauma. Still, Richard's attempts to reach her were met with fear and resistance. Every time he entered the room, Evelyn turned away, clinging tighter to Nathaniel's presence. She trusts me, Nathaniel explained to Richard one evening in the corridor, his tone calm but unyielding. Forcing yourself on her now will only push her further away. Richard's voice was ragged. You think I don't see what's happening? You're taking advantage of this. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. No, I'm giving her what you never did: safety, respect, care. Richard had no response. Deep down, he knew it was true. Meanwhile, Sabrina's carefully constructed world began to fracture. The accident had stirred whispers about the mysterious call Richard received minutes before Evelyn's crash, about Sabrina's growing desperation to secure her place in the Hawley fortune one night. As Richard sat alone in his study, he replayed fragments of the past the night he had been drugged. The convenient timing of Sabrina's pregnancy, her manipulative tears. The pieces began to align into a picture he had long ignored. His fists clenched. If Sabrina had orchestrated this, if she had stolen not only his fidelity, but also the chance for Evelyn's love, then she had destroyed more than just a marriage. She had destroyed him, and perhaps, finally, Richard understood that this time Evelyn would never come back. The unraveling began quietly, almost imperceptibly. A missing receipt here, an overheard conversation there. But soon, the threads wove themselves into a damning tapestry. It was Nathaniel who first voiced the suspicion aloud. One evening, after Evelyn had drifted to sleep, he cornered Richard outside her hospital room. His tone was calm, but his words were razor-sharp. "Tell me, Richard," Nathaniel said, folding his arms. "Don't you find it strange that the night you were supposedly drugged, Sabrina was the only one who knew where you'd be? That she appeared the next morning with crocodile tears and a claim of pregnancy?" Richard's jaw clenched. He wanted to dismiss it, to cling to the convenient narrative he had built for years. But he couldn't, not when fragments of memory, the oddly sweet taste of his drink, Sabrina's sudden appearance, came rushing back with brutal clarity. Days later, the final blow landed. Richard's assistant, loyal for years, came forward with evidence she had uncovered, a trail of payments, discreetly funneled through shell accounts, leading directly to Sabrina. Bank statements, text messages, even a recorded voicemail in which Sabrina hissed to an accomplice, "Make sure the dosage isn't lethal. I just need him pliable. Once I have his child, the rest is mine." Richard played the recording again and again, nausea twisting his gut. There was no denying it now. His fall from fidelity hadn't been an accident of weakness. It had been a calculated trap. When he confronted Sabrina, the mask finally slipped. They stood in the grand living room of the Hawley estate, chandeliers glittering above like indifferent witnesses. Sabrina, dressed in silk, reclined on the sofa with an expression of defiance. "So what if I did?" She snapped when pressed. "Do you think you would have ever left her if I hadn't forced your hand? You were obsessed with your perfect little wife, so untouchable, so righteous. I gave you what she couldn't, a family, heirs." Richard's voice cracked with fury. "You drugged me? You used me? You destroyed her life, our life, for your ambition." Sabrina's laugh was cold, sharp as glass. "And you let me. Don't pretend you were some saint caught in my web. You wanted me, Richard. All I did was give you a reason to indulge it. The words sliced deep because part of him feared she was right. His negligence, his arrogance, had made him vulnerable. He hadn't protected Evelyn, hadn't cherished her when she was his. And now, standing in the ruins of his marriage, he realized Sabrina had not only stolen his fidelity, she had stolen his chance at redemption. The confrontation ended in chaos. Richard's mother, overhearing the exchange, collapsed into tears. The family lawyers were summoned. Sabrina, screaming threats of exposure and scandal, was escorted out of the estate. Her pregnancy, once hailed as the Hall family's future, was now a bitter reminder of manipulation, but for Richard, the hollow victory brought no solace. He returned to the hospital, desperate to share the truth with Evelyn. To beg her forgiveness, he entered her room quietly, watching her sleep. Her face, pale yet peaceful, stirred a pang so sharp it nearly buckled him. When her eyes fluttered open, hope surged in his chest. "Evelyn," he whispered, sinking into the chair beside her. "I know now. I know what she did. Sabrina drugged me, manipulated everything. You were right all along." She blinked at him, confusion clouding her gaze. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Who are you?" The knife twisted deeper. Richard's throat tightened. "It's me, Richard, your husband. I failed you, but I see it now, please. Let me make it right." But Evelyn turned her head toward the doorway where Nathaniel stood, steady as ever. Her lips curved faintly, her voice clear despite the fog of memory loss. "I don't know him, but I know you." Richard's heart fractured. He looked between them, Evelyn clinging to Nathaniel's presence. Nathaniel's protective gaze never wavering, and understood that no revelation, no apology, could undo what had been lost. For the first time in his life, Richard Hawley was utterly powerless. The Hawley estate, once a beacon of opulence, had grown eerily silent. The halls lined with portraits of ancestors and adorned with chandeliers now echoed with nothing but Richard's footsteps. Even the staff moved quietly, their eyes averted, as if the house itself carried shame. Richard sat alone in his study, the amber glow of a half-empty decanter casting fractured light across the room. Papers lay scattered on his desk: divorce decrees, financial reports, press clippings chronicling Sabrina's disgrace. None of it mattered. What haunted him wasn't what the world saw, but what he had lost in private. He poured himself another glass of whiskey, but let it sit untouched. Across the desk lay a photograph, edges worn from being handled too often. Evelyn at a gala years ago, her gown the color of emerald, her smile radiant. Her eyes fixed on him with trust that seemed almost impossible now. Richard pressed the photo flat against the desk, his chest tightening. He had once thought himself untouchable, the king of Hogg Corporation, master of his world. But in the end, he had been undone, not by competitors or markets, but by his own arrogance, his blindness to the woman who had given him everything. Upstairs, the nursery Sabrina had insisted on designing lay abandoned. The wallpaper of soft blues and creams mocked him with its emptiness. The cribs sat unused, their linens pristine, a monument to the illusion of a family that had never truly existed. Richard stood in the doorway, the silence suffocating. For a moment, he imagined Evelyn there, rocking a child gently, her soft humming filling the air. The image pierced him with such clarity that his knees nearly buckled. But the reality was stark. Evelyn would never walk these halls again. Meanwhile, across the city, Evelyn's recovery was steady. Though fragments of her memory remained hazy, she found solace in the life Nathaniel had helped her rebuild. His quiet presence, his unwavering care, had become her anchor. One evening, she sat on the balcony of her modest apartment, a blanket draped over her shoulders as the city lights shimmered below. Nathaniel joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Long day?" he asked gently, handing her a cup. She nodded, her lips curving in a faint smile. It feels different now. The exhaustion isn't from fear anymore. It's just life. And for once, that feels enough. Nathaniel sat beside her, his gaze steady. That's because you're not living in someone else's shadow anymore. This is your life, Evelyn. You've taken it back. Her heart warmed at his words. She thought of the woman she had once been timid, silenced, clinging to a loveless marriage out of duty. And now, those scars remained. She was stronger, freer. She turned to Nathaniel, her eyes reflecting the city's glow. I don't know what the future holds, she admitted softly. But for the first time, I want to find out. He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. Then we'll find out together. Their hands remained clasped. The quiet between them filled not with emptiness, but with possibility dot back at the estate. Richard sat in the darkness of his study, the untouched whiskey glass before him. The walls that had once symbolized power now felt like a prison. The silence bore down on him, broken only by the faint creak of the house settling. He whispered Evelyn's name into the emptiness, but there was no answer, only the echo of his own regret. Richard's world grew smaller with each passing day. The phone that once buzzed with constant calls from investors, board members, and admirers now sat silent on his desk. Invitations to galas and private dinners dwindled until they vanished altogether. Even the whispers of the staff seemed to fade, leaving behind a void so profound it pressed against his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. He spent long hours wandering the estate, moving from one empty room to the next. The library smelled of old leather and dust, shelves lined with books Evelyn had once chosen, her delicate handwriting still visible in the margins. The dining hall echoed with memories of dinners where she had sat across from him, trying to draw him into conversation while he scrolled through emails. Now, he would give anything to hear her voice fill the silence. One night, Richard found himself in the garden, staring at the withered roses Evelyn had once tended with care. He crouched to touch a brittle stem, the thorn pricking his finger. A single drop of blood welled up, bright against his skin. He let it linger, a small, sharp reminder of how neglect turns beauty into ruin. He thought of calling her again, but he knew the outcome. Her voice, once soft with patience, had grown cold with finality. She had moved on beyond him, beyond the life he had chained her to. And all he could do was stand among the ruins of what he had destroyed. Meanwhile, Evelyn's days blossomed with a new rhythm. With Nathaniel by her side, she began to rebuild not just her health, but her sense of self. She attended therapy, took walks through the park, even started sketching again, a hobby she had abandoned years ago under Richard's dismissive gaze. Nathaniel encouraged her gently but firmly, celebrating small victories. You're stronger than you realize, he told her one morning as she finished a mile-long walk, sweat dampening her brow. She laughed, breathless but triumphant. The sound of melody he never tired of hearing. One evening, Nathaniel surprised her with a visit to a community center he was helping to fund. The halls were filled with laughter, children chasing each other, families gathered around tables of food. Evelyn watched with wide eyes as Nathaniel bent to speak to a little girl clutching a paintbrush. His voice warm and patient. You belong in places like this, Nathaniel told her softly as they left. Places where life is about building, not tearing down. You have so much to give, Evelyn, and you don't need anyone's permission anymore. Her throat tightened as she slipped her hand into his. For the first time, she could see a future not defined by survival, but by choice. Weeks later, Nathaniel asked her again, not with a velvet box this time, but with sincerity that filled the air between them. They were walking along the river, the city's skyline glittering above the water. I don't want to rush you, he said, his voice steady, but I need you to know I still mean it. I want to spend my life with you. Not because you need saving, but because you've saved me in ways you don't even realize. Evelyn's heart swelled, tears catching in her lashes. She didn't give a definitive answer yet, but she leaned into his embrace, whispering, maybe. Maybe I'm finally ready to try. It was enough. Back at the Holly estate, Richard sat in the darkened study, a single lamp casting a pale glow. In his hand, he held Evelyn's old scarf, the silk one she had left behind. He pressed it to his face, inhaling the faint trace of her perfume long since faded. For hours he sat there, clutching a memory that no longer belonged to him. The city moved on without him. Evelyn moved on without him. And Richard Hyle, once the most powerful man in his world, was left with nothing but regret. For Evelyn, the future was no longer a shadow to fear. It was a horizon to walk toward, step by step, hand in hand with someone who had chosen her not for status, not for duty, but for love. And those scars remained. They were no longer chains. They were reminders of battles survived, proof of resilience, and the foundation of a life reborn. The story didn't end with Richard's downfall or Sabrina's exposure. It ended with Evelyn standing beneath the city lights, her hand clasped in Nathaniel's, her heart steady, her spirit unbroken. A new beginning had dawned. And this time, she would not walk it alone.